Welcome to the Salt Flats Innovation Podcast, where we explore the new horizons of our rapidly changing world. I'm Rod Collins, the Chief Facilitator at Salt Flats, and your host for today's podcast. Our guest today is Justin Jarvinen, the Chief Strategist and Head of Business Design and Ventures at Salt Flats. And our topic today is the arc of innovation. This is a very timely topic because many of us had an opportunity to witness a piece of innovation history as SpaceX and NASA just delivered American astronauts to the International Space Station. It's amazing to have the opportunity to witness such incredible ingenuity. Justin, I understand you're a bit of a space geek. In fact, you own a piece of space history, don't you? Tell us a little bit about that.
I do. Thanks, Rod. And it's nice to be chatting with you here this morning. Yeah, I grew up probably not unlike most other kids, or certainly lots of other kids, wanting to be an astronaut. And I've always found space fascinating. And it kind of led me to also be interested in physics and other sorts of things. I think as a kid, you're interested in weightlessness and rockets, right? Yeah, so a handful of years ago, I was fortunate enough to be able to take my fascination with space and got into the auction market and kind of started looking for space photography. And I have quite a little collection now. I thought I would share one with you today. I bought this at auction in London a number of years ago, but this is actually the first photograph of a hurricane taken from space. It was taken from Walt Cunningham was the astronaut who took this. This was 1968, and it was the Apollo 7 mission. And it was the first time a hurricane was photographed from space, actually by a human from space. And that was Hurricane Gladys, which was over the Gulf of Mexico. And it was a fascinating flight. Apollo 7 was. It almost ended in mutiny, but it's a fascinating story. And so that's a little bit of my collection. I pulled it off the wall for you this morning.
Oh, great. That's a great story. So let's get to today's topic. I thought we would talk a bit about what it takes to bring ingenuity to life within the realm of corporate innovation. Now, I understand you've developed a framework I'd like to discuss today called the Arc of Innovation. What was the inspiration behind that framework, and why is it so useful?
Great question. So I've been doing innovation, quotes. There are a lot of definitions for innovation, but for the better part of 25 years or so. And the bulk of that time, I was a founder. I was developing my own ideas. I was at times going through the process of developing the ideas, raising money, and had gone through that full cycle and had plenty of failures along the way. And as I had evolved my own skills and exited a business or two, and I had kind of shifted into, I did some turnaround work, and I'd shifted into corporate innovation. And what I recognized, and this is an epiphany that kind of matured and evolved over quite a number of years, but what I had recognized was that what it takes to bring an idea to life as an entrepreneur, raising a chunk of money and going out and trying to solve some massive problem, was considerably different than innovation with respect to a corporation. And not from a cultural standpoint, although that's really important. But what I noticed was that the process, the Wild West as an entrepreneur, needed to be de-risked. It needed to be measured within the context of a corporation. And what we see today, and what I had started to recognize, was that innovation hadn't really been funded appropriately, and in large part because innovation was still inherently very risky, and lots of high fail rates and so forth. And so I started to recognize, like, what are some of the things that we needed to do in corporate innovation that you can't get away with, that maybe you could get away with as some super bright young entrepreneur with a big idea. So I worked at identifying, well, what is an actual problem? So at a large 5, 10, $15 billion corporation, your problem isn't a $20 million problem with a handful of, very niche market, handful of users. You need to get really good at identifying an actual problem that has a big addressable market. And what we've noticed, and Rod, you and I have done this quite a bit together too, is oftentimes problems aren't really problems once you really get into it. So that was the first thing that I kind of recognized was how do we make sure that what we're identifying is an actual problem that we can go solve in some novel sort of a way that has a large, if not massive, market attached to it. One thing I kind of have learned from you actually, but have evolved over time is that diversity of ideas and thinking and people and experiences is essential for that kind of first part of innovation. And again, going back to my roots as an entrepreneur in a garage with some funding and so forth, is the route to that new big idea is typically like epiphany and let's go, kind of a thing. And you can't do that in corporations, right? And so the what you call collective intelligence, and I know that you were doing this a lot going way back when you were running, things at Blue Cross and so forth, are that the diversity of opinions and ideas and backgrounds and experiences is essential. And I noticed that in corporations, it was really difficult to get that broad, very diverse set of perspectives and so forth. And so that was kind of the second thing that I felt we needed to address, which we're doing through ecosystems. Getting comfortable with failure was a big one for me, but failure is a part of the process of innovation and nowhere close to the outcome, right? And so many times corporations will kill ideas after they've sunk way too much money into them. The sunk cost fallacy is something that's alive and well in a lot of corporations. But addressing the need to experiment and fail and get feedback and fix and continually evolve an idea as part of the process is something that's very difficult for large corporations to become comfortable with. That I think is actually essential to the process of innovation. So that was kind of something that I felt like we needed to address. And I'm getting to it because the arc of innovation, the topic that we'll talk about today, kind of enables all of these things to happen in a very disciplined sort of way. The most important part is execution. And that's kind of a no-brainer, right? So execution, duh. But it's amazing how poorly a lot of innovation teams are at the actual execution of each of the different parts of innovation, such that the end result, once it makes its way to market, is a bona fide business. And the main reason why execution is really important is because within large corporates, they have a brand, and that brand is at risk. So a lot of times ideas will get killed if they're seen as being a little too risky and so forth. And so what we do at Salt Flats, what the Arc of Innovation helps kind of ensure is that we have a way to measure ideas and we can identify whether an idea should be a new product or service offering within a business, more core to adjacent for the business. And what that really means is that we've de-risked it to a point where the brand can measure the risk and so forth, and failure of that idea has really been brought down to a very manageable, if not zero, kind of a level. But then also recognizing when that idea can just get spun out or kicked out of the business and sent off on its own to become a business. It's identified a completely different market and so forth. So I think nailing execution within the context of supporting and maintaining a brand is really critical. And then the final point is that oftentimes, and particularly, when we're founders of businesses, we're running with that one idea. And that's important. You don't want your founder as an investor to be running off with 14 different ideas. But I think within the context of corporate strategy, having options and what we call optionality is really important because that leads to better decision making. So as the CEO or the executive leadership team of an organization, you do want to have the ability to look at a portfolio of different ideas along the spectrum of risk, measured and scored, such that you can inform your own corporate strategy with real hard data and options. And so that single idea thing that, if an individual founder or founding team might be going with, doesn't work as well within the context of corporate strategy, because it's more ideal to have a portfolio of really good ideas
Mhm.
to look at and so forth. So those were kind of what I had worked through in my mind and started to put pen to paper on, and those are really kind of the different problems that I had kind of witnessed and experienced as I shifted into corporate strategy, all of which became part of Arc of Innovation.
So it sounds like the arc of innovation is kind of like a bridge. It's a bridge between ideas and ways of thinking that have been very successful in the entrepreneurial space and kind of defining markets today. And that bridges into the context of the corporate world in a way that corporations could scale and be impactful across a massive organization as they have to compete with these new entities, some of which may have started in garages. It's a whole different space. So
Yeah. I love
fascinating.
the analogy. I don't know how many of them actually start in garages now, right? But
Yeah.
that's the old Hewlett Packard story, right?
Well, it certainly feels that way sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, lots of organizations today are using a variety of frameworks. And of course, the Arc of Innovation is a framework. And they're using frameworks like the Lean Startup or various types of workshops like design thinking has become very popular. And the Arc of Innovation does some of the same things. So the question I have for you, Justin, is where does the ARC pick up where others leave off? Where does ARC become more useful as an innovation platform than others that some of our listeners might be more familiar with?
Good question. So we've all read, the various books, and I think that the Lean Startup, for example, masterfully helped all of us entrepreneurs who have read the book and subscribed to their workshops and their kind of philosophy about building startups. It helped tremendously, helped us kind of frame the steps and the reasons why we should be doing certain things and so forth. And it works as a framework. And so what Arc of Innovation does, where the Lean Startup and other frameworks or derivative frameworks like that kind of leave off, is it brings a discipline and it kind of sequences things such that you know what you need to do next, and it scales, so you can do it repeatably, many of them at the same time. All the steps are the same, and it brings a certain discipline and rigor to the process, that makes it, in our opinion and in my opinion, more valuable within the context of corporate strategy and corporate innovation. So everything is scored and measured kind of along the way. So you can see the idea, or even kind of a snapshot of that idea in a point in time at a certain maturity level within the context of your corporate strategy, and so forth. And so I think the word that I would use that best describes Arc of Innovation is discipline.
Mhm.
And so when we're talking daily with our corporate sponsors, with the C-suite, on down to the folks who are working on the teams and so forth, it's that kind of constant understanding of where we are, and where the risk is, and what we need to do to address the risks, such that when the decisions are being made at the board or any other level, it's made with a high level of very accurate data, and that's all within the context of a new idea, a product, a service, a business, and so forth. So understanding precisely what needs to be done all throughout the process is really important, of course, and the why and the how, which is where we get into our programming and some of the workshops that we use and so forth. So we set out to develop a scoring system. So the scoring system helps us understand, is this core? Is this a transformational product? Those are vectors. So it's we call it vector disruption or vector transformation, but it's really speed, in a direction, to go back to use a space analog. So developing a scoring system such that if you had 30 or 40 ideas that you were looking at as your options, you would see how they score and what those scores mean, so that you can kind of normalize the data and look at it within the context of your whole business. My hope is that as innovation gets more successful and your success rates go up and up and up, and everything becomes more measurable, that your innovation will see greater investment. Because you'll see that innovation isn't something that's intrinsically highly risky and susceptible to failure if you don't nail that moonshot, but actually a high performing investment within the whole context of your portfolio. And that's where scoring becomes very, very important. And then, of course, measuring ideas on a risk-adjusted basis. So traders, there's some math terms that we use that you don't see with a lot of other innovation shops, but like Sharpe ratios and risk-adjusted returns from your innovation portfolio helps you measure the investment and the return on investment relative to more traditional investments you might be making, or improvements, CapEx sorts of things, or even with respect to acquisitions that you might make. So if you can take your innovation endeavors and your innovation program and kind of normalize the data and the metrics and the measurements that are coming out of that, and look at it within the context of the rest of your business with ease, then I think it gets a lot easier for you to make the investments into innovation, which helps accelerate the growth and profitability of your own business. It certainly helps you recognize the value of entering a brand new market within the context of your whole business. So we've done a lot of things to kind of bring a discipline to innovation, not only with respect to how we're doing it and the experiments and the feedback and all that kind of stuff, but also then how we're measuring the time it's taking to achieve our goals and objectives, and what that business or idea might mean financially within the context of the rest of the business that you're running. And I think that would be kind of the main takeaway for Arc of Innovation.
So this is probably very important to our listeners, especially those who are in the corporate world, that the Arc of Innovation is fundamentally a discipline. And I think a lot of times executives and middle managers in corporations may see entrepreneurs as being undisciplined, sometimes even perceive them as being lucky. But what I'm hearing you're saying is what the Arc of Innovation is doing, it's tapping into a discipline, a very different discipline than perhaps traditional corporates are used to, but a discipline that may be more right for the times, and providing that to them in a way that they're able to apply it within a large corporate context and to compete in new ways in these 21st century environments. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. You nailed it. And, it's, I'm a system thinker. And one part highly creative. We have to have the ability to go out and explore and make discoveries. I'm going to stick with the space analogies if that's cool, but having the ability to go out and really explore and make, breakthrough discoveries to solve problems in incredibly novel sorts of ways are the really exciting part about, innovation. And as founders and entrepreneurs, we get to do that, whether it's an epiphany or luck, or we've trained our brain to recognize these certain things, or it's inherent, or whatever, is awesome. But if we can couple that with a rigid discipline such that corporates become comfortable with the outputs and the failure that's intrinsic to that whole process, and it becomes a part of this highly measurable, very disciplined sort of a thing, enables corporations to scale their innovation efforts and really drive massive, incalculable value through their businesses once they're able to kind of harness it. And so as a systems thinker, I look at the Arc of Innovation as just being an incredibly helpful tool, with basically a tool kit or a tool belt, basically, where we have lots of tools that go into it, such that corporates feel and achieve success in a very measured sort of a way. And we've been using Arc of Innovation now for a couple of years to great success with a number of our clients who are themselves, multi-billion-dollar organizations. And I hope to see more companies kind of embrace Arc of Innovation as this disciplined tool that enables both the creative as well as as the disciplined approach to framing up innovation. So that's kind of, I think, the message that I'd like to get across.
Okay. Well, one final question. You've talked about the portfolio of ideas and how important that is, and I think that's something that appeals to people within corporations. Tell us about how the arc of innovation fosters the development of portfolio ideas, and how does this really work?
Yeah. So another really good question. I'm a very firm believer in innovation portfolios. In large part because it creates options for the C-suite, and so you need to have a good number of ideas kind of working in tandem. But going back to the beginning, you don't want to have a different framework for different types of ideas and so forth. And you don't want it to be limiting in the sense that it only delivers a certain outcome. And we're an outcomes first sort of an organization. So we're always starting, maybe it's another conversation where we talk about value systems, but we're starting with the outcome. The desired outcome is a thing. And the arc of innovation is just the framework, the process that we use, or the approach to get to that outcome. But what's awesome about the arc of innovation is if we follow the arc, we have the ability to mature and evolve dozens, if not hundreds, of ideas simultaneously using the same process. So to give you a real quick example, Rod, and something you'll enjoy and appreciate, I fully expect a smile, but we'll take collective intelligence, right? So we get a group of 50 people, say, in a room to address some problems that we've identified. And we have developers, we have operations folks, we have marketing people, we've got creative folks, we've got PhDs with really specific disciplines, and consumers, who don't have any expertise. We've got this incredible collection of people in this room coming up with ideas to help us solve for these. Well, with 50 people, we could theoretically deliver 200 to 300 really good ideas. Maybe we distill them down into 30 or 40 awesome ideas that we then begin to step down. The arc of innovation enables us to run with 5, 10, 15 of those really good ideas simultaneously, such that as they all mature and a couple drop off, they've proved not to be viable. We use the same exact process to build portfolios of ideas, such that now the C-suite starts to see 5, 10, 15, 20 ideas all scored with the ability to then inform their corporate strategy based on these evolving ideas. And we just use the one framework. We can pull in different teams with different areas of expertise into that and so forth. So I'm really excited that the ARC does scale innovation. It is a single framework that enables us to deliver portfolios of ideas, always done the same way, in a very meticulous, methodical sort of a way.
Wow, these sound like incredibly valuable tools for corporations in our 21st century environment. Justin, I want to thank you for an engaging and enlightening discussion, and thanks to our audience for sharing time with us today. We invite you to subscribe to our mailing list so you can start learning of upcoming podcasts. Please join us next month when our special guest will be Rick McNabb, who will be talking about why innovation is the only competitive advantage. Until next time, keep exploring and keep thinking of new ideas that you can use to delight your customers.